Welcome to episode 4 of Meeting of the Minds, the show devoted to the growing world of independent sponsorship and deal-by-deal private equity. I'm Will Smith, here with my partners in Minds Capital, Max Lummis and Nicholas James. We're going to call out a few of our favorite points from this episode's main event, the interview with Edward Crawford, and then we'll run that interview. Nicholas, what grabbed you from this conversation with Edward that we're about to hear?
Edward's been a friend of mine and also a mentor for many years. He has an outstanding reputation in the independent sponsor community. And I think we go through his background, which is really, really impressive. But the one thing that stood out to me is what we cover at the very beginning, how Coltala Capital was founded almost like an institutionalized private equity, and that they raised capital. They had working capital to chase deals for several years. They hired a team from the onset, and they professionally approached the deal sourcing from the get-go with more resources than what you typically see in the independent sponsor world, right? Because the typical independent sponsor will have to find a deal on a shoestring budget up front, and only after that do they have a little bit cash to cover their own personal life and mortgage payments, as well as scale their independent sponsor business. So in their case, they did it, upside down, which is more what you would see with a fund, in that they raised the capital and really got this off the ground in a faster way.
Yeah, that was a great thing to call out and hear his thoughts on. What about you, Max?
Yeah, no, Nicholas, that's a great point. And I think that aligns with their focus of being more of a long-term group, a long-term investment sponsor versus sort of some of the shorter-term 3 to 5 year holds that we normally see. So building out that infrastructure and building out that team ahead of time was very important, because I think, it has played a role in them being able to hold and operate these businesses for the long haul. What was super interesting to me was the fact that it seems as if Edward and his team are very, very focused on relationships and sort of old school business, really. So, so many of us are doing LinkedIn and doing outreach digitally, and it's great and it's super effective. But there's really no substitute, I think, for building these strong, lasting business relationships with an in-person component. And he mentions that they're friends with some of their best contacts and some of the folks that send them deal flow. They hang out and they're friends. And I think that's important. And I think that's a good lesson and a good reminder to anybody in business that, old school business is still very important. And they match that, of course, with data and metrics, and they're extremely proficient and detail-oriented with how they run and evaluate their businesses. So not just the personal relationships, but the reliance on data as well. It was very impressive.
Well, some of the numbers that he threw up in terms of deal flow from certain efforts were really eye-popping. How a single mailing to their list can generate over 10 deals, or at least 10 leads on a deal. How consistent and systematic they are was what struck me, because he goes into detail on what you're talking about, Max, the in-person and sometimes Zoom calls, but the nurturing of relationships that's very systematic, but not clinical, because he talks about how he likes to do business with people that he likes, as we all do. And so the people that are kind of in the Rolodex that he's on a constant outreach schedule with are also the very people that he'd like to see and catch up with anyway. But they're also really consistent with their newsletter. So newsletter is digital, yes, but it's also like the oldest form of digital. It's almost like an email newsletter is kind of like old school in this day and age. But they're so they have this newsletter, it goes out to 30,000 people. And by the way, I searched for the Coltala report. You can Google it and find it, because MailChimp automatically posts it to a URL. And it's essentially, looks like a newsletter from a private equity shop, which is really what it is. Nothing overly engineered or fancy. So I think the magic is in how consistent they are, that they send it out without fail. They try to put in just a few, unique pieces of content every month. And it really bears fruit. It's a 30,000 person list now, and they get incredible deal flow from pressing that send button. So I think the takeaway is that in business development, under the business development umbrella, be it sales or marketing, when you're generating deal flow, the consistency, we all know this already. It's just hard to discipline yourself to do it or your firm to do it. But if you can, it really pays off.
Did you sign up for the newsletter?
I didn't sign up for the newsletter, but yeah.
You should probably go do that right now.
Yeah. But I will say though, from Acquiring Minds, Michael Arrieta of Garden City, who's another kind of long-term holding company, signs me up to his newsletter. And so I get that every Saturday. And basically it's just a curated list of 6 or 8 links kind of related to small business from all over the web, often just news stories of interest from that week. And every week, Saturday in, Saturday out, I open that email. He put me on the list, and that's something that Edward talks about. You kind of ask for forgiveness rather than permission. It's just a once a month email newsletter. You're not overdoing it. But this so I have, I feel like this Garden City brand is much stronger in my mind than it would otherwise be because I'm just getting this trickle from them. So we'll see if I actually go and get Coltalas or not. Anything else to say, guys, before we hear the main event here with Edward?
No, great stuff.
Great. Here is episode 4, Meeting of the Minds with Edward Crawford. Welcome to Meeting of the Minds, your connection to the growing world of independent sponsors and deal-by-deal private equity. We are your hosts, Will Smith and Nicholas James. Edward Crawford is with us today. Edward's the founder of Coltala Holdings, an independent sponsor group based in Dallas. He hails from Shreveport, Louisiana, where he earned the nickname Crawdaddy Crawford, which is a lot of fun to say. At the ripe old age of 23, Edward started his career by building a coffee business in the Dominican Republic, in the DR, that served 400 local farmers. He later became an alum of MIT and Goldman Sachs. In 2011, he decided to serve, so he was deployed to Afghanistan a week after the birth of his second child. He is a Governor Abbott appointee for economic development. He serves on the Texas Workforce Commission. He's a board member at the Dallas YPO chapter, and he's a big advocate for the nonprofit Carry the Load. Coltala currently owns 3 businesses in home health, in air conditioning, and engineering. And the firm sees itself more as business owners than private equity. We'll get to that. But first, Edward, with a resume like that, military service, governor appointee, now a business executive, I got to ask, when are you running for office?
Well, the answer is I just really love what I'm doing now, and I've always tried to align our mission and margin approach to really have an impact through business. So one of my mentors at Tulane was a guy named John Elstrad, who helped build Whole Foods. He was the chairman before they sold to Amazon, and he taught me this double bottom line business model. He was the founder of, or helped with Silk, soy milk, Celestial Seasoning, Samazon, a lot of those kind of interesting brands that helped a lot of people through Whole Foods and kind of that double bottom line. So our mission margin approach is like, we enjoy what we do and helping recruit, good employees, happiness in the workforce, create new jobs, and do it right here in Texas is we've really tried to, Ralph and my partner and I have aligned our mission with that. And so that's what I'm doing right now and just really enjoying it.
Well, fantastic, Edward. And we're going to, I'm sure, come back to that theme over the course of this conversation. But speaking of your team, so to kick things off, tell us a little bit about the team formation, because you did things in a slightly different order when getting Coltala off the ground. You raised the money to build a team and infrastructure first before going out and finding that first deal. Usually it's the other way around.
Correct. So when I met Ralph Manning, he already had a lot of this plan in place, and I had looked at building a business with some other folks, and we kind of came together. I actually started helping him with his business plan, and then we realized maybe we should do this together. And so part of our thesis was if we raise some capital early and have a group be part of our business, then we can focus on a lot of the things to build a real brand, to build a real team, instead of just like, let's go get a deal. And we can build a systematic approach too, so that when we get in businesses, we can actually do something to help, and we have some of those resources. And so looking back on that, it took us longer to get started than we would have liked. And, we made a lot of mistakes along the way. But we were viable and had enough runway to see certain things through. If we hadn't done that, I think it would have put so much pressure on both of our families that we might not exist today. So in retrospect, it was a good decision. And now we have some value in a lot of businesses because of it.
And for those out there who might not yet be active independent sponsors and are thinking about doing it, and maybe and thinking about how they'll approach doing so, what did that first team look like? What roles did you fill? Who did you need to have in the seat? How big, et cetera?
Right. So we actually overbuilt the team initially because we thought we'd move a lot faster. And in moving slower, we realized, hey, this is too big of a team. So certain people had to leave the team, and certain people stayed and make sacrifices, both either to stay or to leave. But we wanted to make sure we had, a very strong analytical component, somebody that could do a lot of the work while we were working with the teams. So we had a guy named Blaine Kerr, actually out of Coors. He incredible hire. I think there were 70 people out for that spot, and we got him. He now runs very large P&L at Choice, our home health business, over 10 million or so of EBITDA. Melanie Barton, who is with us, she's kind of our COO internally in Coltala, and then we have an operating partner as well. And then we have some very good advisors. We also have 2 investors that are on our IC, and both of those investors have played an integral role in giving us advice, steering us in the right direction when we were, can get myopic, and we were running in one direction, say, hey, why don't you stop and think about this, and how much runway do you have? And so there were some very important inflection points along our journey where our investors said, hey, you need to think about this instead of that. And that very much, kept us on track where we might have gone off track. And so I think the team we initially built and the investors we put together are largely responsible for us still being viable and being successful.
Do you recall what any of those things were that the investors forewarned you about and prevented disaster?
Sure. There was just there was a runway issue at one point. We had a certain amount of runway, and we wanted to make sure we had enough runway to really run the business effectively, right? And make rational decisions on which, companies to buy versus, companies that, making those decisions for survival purposes, right? And so, we've tweaked budgets. We've gone down to the bare bones at certain points where we're just getting real frugal and pushing the runway out. So like any entrepreneur, it's about, if you have a good idea and you think it's viable, it's how much runway do you have? If you have enough, you'll probably hit it. If you don't, you might not. So they really helped us in that runway conversation. Tough conversations, but good, and good advisors.
Most independent sponsors, of course, as we said, do it the other way around. And that's why it's so hard to get started, because you need a deal in order to get a management fee. And that management fee is not only paying for you scaling up and getting to a second deal, but it's also paying your mortgage and your personal expenses. So you're very vulnerable until you get to that point. And for many, even one deal and one management fee is not going to go much farther than the mortgage, right? So in your case, you flipped it on its head. You raised money. Part of the cost of doing that is, giving away probably some of the GP share that you had at Coltala. But were there other costs involved, such as since you suddenly had capital, you were not as entrepreneurial, not as scrappy, and there was a lot of admin? And then I guess the second question, just to build on that, whenever I hear about finance guys going out and raising capital, I mean, why didn't you just raise a fund when you're going out there anyway to raise a buyout shop, right? So what's the distinction there?
Yeah, so I think the first question is, I think it was actually helpful. I think it stopped us and there was some administrative burden, obviously, when you set that type of thing up, and some cost burden. But I think the help and the foresight was much more help than it hurt us, right? So I'd say largely just very positive that we did it that way. And then I would say fund versus non-fund. The fund model to us lends itself to you go get 8 businesses or so, you try to get good returns, then you raise your next fund and fund 2 and fund 3 and fund 4. And if you look at it, we kind of did a look at some of the great businesses, like the Danahers of the world, the Coke Industries, and if you want to build something with truly a ton of value, then flipping it every 7 years and having to change management and completely recap it and put all that pressure through, really just we didn't think is the best model. And so we're kind of a holding company in a private equity skin, if that makes sense. And so there will be businesses we buy and sell over time, but there's also others, depending on the structure, that we can hold for much longer periods of time or own, right? And so that gave us flexibility.
And so when you underwrite a deal, are you deliberately going into them thinking about them as permanent holdings, or is this a case-by-case basis?
It's a case-by-case basis.
And so how do you determine that up front? What are the factors that drive you to saying this deal is good for a 5-year hold and we're going to pitch it that way to investors? Here is the MOIC and IRR they can expect to get, versus, hey, this is a permanent hold. These are the things we're going to do to grow it. And this is the dividend payout that we expect to give you.
Well, so I would say it's not always one or the other, right? So in the scenario where we end up, maybe buying the company one day or owning it outright, the investor will still get the returns along those same lines. We'll just recap through different means, right? Recap rather than sell, right? So there's still an ability to get those top returns that our LPs look for. And then I would say, on the business side, it depends largely. I hate to give that answer. But you can have a great furniture business and then Amazon comes along. You can have a great video business, Blockbuster, and then Netflix comes along, or Kodak's going really well, with the film thing, and then all of a sudden it's digital. And so I think every business is subject to being disrupted in one way, shape, or form. And so I think we are in essential services, and so we try to stay in that lane so that the businesses we're in tend to be essential to humans flourishing, to getting things done in an up or down economy. So we try to look at those that, COVID happens, it's still going to be there. Massive recession happens, it's still going to be there. Those types of businesses. But you always have to be ready to say, okay, this business model doesn't work, and maybe there's an exit. So that's kind of how we look at things. I would say if something we think we can be in for a good 10-year runway, that's where we start thinking, okay, maybe this will be a longer term hold for us.
And so, or at least the way I think about it, when I think about a 5-year time frame, right? You're not only thinking, you're saying 10 years, but I'm saying 5 years. You're not only thinking, will my business be around in 5 years? You're thinking, is my business going to be in a position where we can sell it for a much higher value in 5 years, which means that there has to be no threats on the horizon in 5 or 10 years from now, right? Whenever that timeline you have. Now, double clicking on your statement there, it's not the one or the other. So it sounds like it's more of a dynamic conversation with any given operating company that you have in your portfolio. And so when you're 4 or 5 years into a deal as a sponsor, your deal is going well, you could probably exit and give your investors 3, 4, or 5 times their money. What makes why wouldn't you do that? Why is the other recapping more favorable?
Well, I think you can recap multiple times. You can only sell once would be my answer. And that's we've seen a lot of examples of private equity firms and business owners doing 3 recaps, keeping all their money, and then eventually selling. And so if you do 3 recaps and then you sell, that's a pretty good result, right? Versus you sell once, you've got to go recreate the entire thing again, and you have to take the risk. And so if you have a really solid business that's doing really well, I would make the argument, Coltala would make the argument that let's recap this, let's get a certain MOIC now, and then let's go do it again and again.
But what does recap mean here, Edward? Is a recap, instead of selling 100%, we're selling 70% or rolling some equity?
Well, you could take all the debt off and then reload.
So you're doing a debt recapture. So you're taking out the debt, and because your EBITDA is higher, you can raise more debt than you had. So you lever it up, but you use that delta between the debt you paid down and the new debt you have now to pay out your investors.
That's the most common, is you pay the debt all the way down and you give money to investors, they get a return, then you pay it down again, do the same thing. And then at a certain point you say, hey, either the company's not viable, or we've been in this a while, or oftentimes, the management team says, hey, we're ready to go to a new owner, or we're ready to, get out of the business or something like that. And those are inflection points that you have to take seriously too, because at the end of the day, you've got to see where your operator wants to go. And
but when you have a dividend recap like the one you're talking about, you're actually not changing the cap table or the ownership structure.
Right.
Does the dynamics of the deal reset? Because often I'll talk to independent sponsors and they all say the first 18 months after closing a deal, that's when you can go heavy on add-on acquisitions. That's when you can go heavy on strategic initiatives. That's when there is patience for you to go into the J-curve dynamics. But if you're just resetting and frankly levering the deal up with the same owners after 5 years, can you still do those things? Or does it become just a pure organic continuation of what's in place?
Yeah, I think you can do the things, and I know, I would argue a different story than the 18 months with the, we actually tend to focus in those first 18 months on just solidifying the core, that's what we call it, and just making sure all the processes and structure and the team, everything's right. But we're in one business, we're doing acquisitions, right? We're in year 4.5 in that business. We've just done 2 acquisitions, right? So we're still doing, and we've actually, this is our choice business, but we actually just did another raise, right? And are able to kind of reload and do more acquisitions. So, I think if you have a strong business, I think later in the cycle, even there is that opportunity.
Did you have to work to find investors who were receptive to this model of the recapitalization, the debt-based recapitalization, since it is slightly different than the typical path of just a single exit event and a single liquidity event? Do you have to get a particular investor who's open to that?
Yeah, I think most of the investors we talk to are worried about an MOIC. So we are not an IRR shop. We're just like, hey, can we get you a multiple of invested capital? And because you get to a certain point, you say, okay, let's look at these 2 paths. And as long as the MOIC makes sense in a certain time frame, I've never over my career not experienced issues with investors having it. As long as it's a win, then they're generally okay. Mm-hmm. And that's what we try to work with. We're a win-win shop, so that's what we try to work with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What if you had one investor that wanted out at that point, a minority investor? What would you do?
Well, I think you can buy them out. We always have partners that can buy others out, and we've done that before. We had multiple rounds of fundraises where certain people wanted in, certain people wanted to kind of trim their position a little bit by not participating. So there's a lot of ways to do that.
And so there are 3 types of buyers in that scenario. It's the company itself to do a stock repurchase. It's the other owners that want to increase their share, mm-hmm. or it would be a new investor who wants to get into a deal.
Right. Or if you're acquiring somebody and they want to do a roll, then in the roll, there's a way to do their roll and kind of buy out another investor at that point too. So there's a couple ways to do that.
You mean that you use an add-on acquisition as a catalyst for recapping the broader cap table as well?
You can do that as well. Yep.
Yeah.
And Edward, this is really the way you put it on the pre-call is kind of imported from real estate land, where this feels a lot like a long-term hold of a building. Fair?
Yeah. If you look at Warren Buffett and real estate guys, the key to Warren Buffett's methodology is never sell, right? And you're not paying a lot of taxes. The real estate guys, they just 1031, right? Mm-hmm. The Koch brothers just own their business. Mm-hmm. So there's different ways to think about that. But if you're churning a lot of businesses, it can put stress on them. So listen, there's each one is a different scenario, and it's important to look at it for what it is and not lump it into others, right? But we've just seen numerous examples. Nick knows this because we have a group that Nick's a part of that we meet frequently, and we've had about just every type of financing, from somebody owning a company outright to being a minority owner but having control of the business. To recapping it 3 times and selling it to selling it in 2 years, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. What we try to do is keep our head on a swivel and do the right thing for all parties.
Mm-hmm. So request for you, Edward, when you do get into politics one day, because even though you deny it, I know you will. Can you get us a 1031 for the private equity space?
I don't know why there isn't one. And
Exactly.
honestly, with I will say this, with death tax, there's a lot of wonderful businesses where the business would continue, but they have to pay so much taxes on the business, it stresses the family, and they have to either put debt on a business that didn't need debt, which hurts it and could kill it, or sell a business to somebody that can't run it as well to pay for the taxes. And that just has never made a lot of sense to me. So I agree. If you can 1031 a building, why can't you 1031 a business that has, building, you will have a staff that runs it, but a business has people in it. And so, to maybe fire a bunch of employees and ruin somebody's career, and they're in, their 15th year of their career, that might be a 30-year career in a business, so that you can get taxes at that point, it just doesn't make sense to me. So just raise sales tax a little. I don't know. There's got to be another solution.
Well said. Well said. I'm voting for you, Edward.
Well, we'll see. I'm sure there's something wrong with what I said, and there's some reason why you can't do it, but I haven't seen it yet.
Edward, pivoting a little bit to some of the Coltala differentiation that we talked about earlier in our pre-call, and that was in your playbook, your team building playbook within the acquisitions. Mm-hmm. Can you give us that kind of the 30 seconds on that to set the stage?
Yeah, sure. So we use something called Culture Index that's very important to us. It's a psychometric survey to understand how people work, right? And so we do that on every management team. In fact, when people approach us about a deal, they send us the financials. We kind of look at the financials and we're like, okay, now we need an org chart and we want you to take this survey. And they're like, what? Nobody's ever asked us to do that before. And we basically tell them, like, that's more important than your financials, right? Financials are great. Looks like good gross margins, good EBITDA margins. We're impressed. We love it. But who are you guys? And so by learning that and seeing an org chart of the top five to seven people in an organization and looking at those surveys, we can say, okay, this person has a lot of A. This person is the detail behind the financials. This person has, a really social personality. And is the culture carrier for HR inside the business, or the top salesperson in the business, right? Or, we have such a strategic CEO, owner of this business, and we look down a level below and there's nobody with any strategic anything below him. Okay, we're going to need to solve for that at some point. And we have open conversations with families, fathers and sons. Like, hey, here's the father, here's the son. Where does the son really fit, right? Mothers and daughters, where does the daughter really fit? And try to make sure that we go into it with open eyes, and that they do too. And oftentimes we won't do the deal, or it won't work for them or won't work for us, but they'll take that knowledge and they'll use it to be better. So our first thing is kind of what I'd call our people. Our motto is people, plan, process, performance, but the people first. So we look at that, and then we also look at what are the main 8 core operating metrics that really matter to this business. And we layer on about 7 more that are for the industry to get to about 15. And we work with investment banks and the people that really know the industry and say, okay, 7 years from now, right, we get to end of a rainbow where we want to be. What's the perfect business in this space, whether it's aerospace, home health, HVAC, whatever it may be, and what do these metrics look like? And early on in the first 90 days, we identify those 15 and we put basically a target on each one of the 15. And each month we look at those targets and they're either red or green to target or not. If they're red for a few months, we say, okay, let's do some problem solving. Is our target too high? Are we not working hard enough? Are we not looking at it the right way? Like, what can we do? Let's do some problem solving, find the root cause and try to get us back green. The idea being year 1, you may be 43% green on average on those 15 metrics. Year 5, year 6, you start to get 80, 85, 90, to where you never hit perfection, but you start to see this business is really stable. And then if you look at a seller, you look at a lender, you look at bringing on a CEO, if you hit a certain threshold and the current CEO wants to leave, you say, this is our business. We scored 83 over 6 years. We've done all these metrics, right? And grinded it out. And then each person has had kind of a responsibility for some of those metrics to help improve them. So it's a culture of continuous improvement. We call it Coltala Enterprise System, loosely based off the Danaher kind of lean system that came from the Toyota production system. And we use data with people, and we use metrics. And the idea is basically to do simple things well and focus on them, and track, measure, and improve. So we track, measure, improve everything. And then we have a problem. We do what's called plan, do, check, act.
So there were 4 sections: people, plan, process, and performance. And so within each of those, you guys, did I get this right? You set a goal at the very way beginning, maybe even before you bought the acquisition.
Right.
Here is where we see an industry leader being on these 4 in 7 years. And then you have some kind of way of measuring the baseline and how you're doing over time, and you review that in board meetings. Do you bring in outside counsel or industry experts to think out how it's going to look in 7 years?
Yeah, we often do. We'll bring in either operators to inform those decisions, on a board as a board advisor, right? But we also talk to, we'll go find the investment bank that's done the most deals in the space and understands the space really well, and say, okay, what does a good business look like? If you were going, hey, Goldman Sachs, hey, Lincoln, if you were going to go sell this business in 7 years and get the biggest multiple you could, because not just because you're selling it because it's pretty or shiny, but because it's the best business, right? All these things ultimately should mean it's the most solid business to get a great multiple. What are those things that we would want in the businesses you're selling at 150 million, the top line? We're at 20. So what does it look like there? And so we'll build that by talking to those experts.
How do you quantify it?
How do we quantify the 15 or?
Well, yeah, you're talking about the percentage that goes from 40 to 85%.
Oh, yeah. So that's actually a bit more art than science. So we don't, the 15 can't be equally weighted. Like you can't weight, let's say one of them's regrettable churn, right? That can't have the same state like in one of our bowlers, it's density. Like you want a certain density in different states. It's important in like home health or hospice, right? Density is important, but regrettable churn, if you're at like 43% and the industry is at 20, that's much more important than if your density isn't super high. Does that make sense? And so what we try to do is we generally have like 3 tiers, and we'll try to do a kind of we'll do weighted averages. So we'll disproportionately weight certain things that we think are more important in different businesses. In HVAC, for example, how many Google ratings you have and how many service contracts you have is really important. So that's going to be up there, pretty high. And in a lot of businesses, regrettable churn, we see as one that's like, if your business has a lot of churn, you could die, you could be in a lot of trouble. And so that's usually heavily weighted as well.
What are the 3 tiers?
They're not divided necessarily in tiers. They're just different weightings. And so we'll have, like, if we have 15, we may have 5 or 6 that are most important, and they might be 8% or 9%, whereas others might be 3%.
Okay, so to summarize, you have 4 sections, the 4 Ps. From that, you get around 15 metrics that shows you where the business should be in 7 years. You weight those 15, and then you score them as you go, and that gives you an aggregate score of where you are as a company.
Correct. And what's nice is then you have the data. We have a president's letter every month that the president or CEO of the company writes that goes through a lot of these metrics. And that letter in that, what we call a bowler, we can then give to somebody looking at the business and say, hey, we have 7 years of monthly data.
And do you ever see any of these metrics go in the wrong direction? And what kind of conversation does that prompt?
Oh, yeah, all the time. Sometimes you're pushing the envelope so hard. You may be doing acquisitions, or you've put on a new business line, and the new business line is just sucking wind, and you have to make a decision, or you go into a new state with a product or a new state with a service. And you say, hey, we've got 28 locations, but one of them has not been making money for 2.5 years, is red, right? And you have to make, tough decisions there. But generally speaking, when something is red for multiple months, we do what's called an A3 problem solving. So an A3 is just a one-page kind of one page that you get off a copier, right? And the idea is you do the 5 whys. Like you basically ask, why is this happening, and try to get to the root cause. And you try to do what's called a Pareto chart that tries to get you back to where you were, right? How do we get back to where our target was if we think it's still the right target? And so a good example in home health was we had people filling out the Big Chief pads, right? And they weren't, able to fill out the reports as well. Kind of like, cops, if they don't do it real time and they wait till they get to the precinct on Friday to fill out all the reports for 5 days, might not go as well. So in this case, we're like, okay, there's laptops. So they're typing on laptops. When a laptop, if you're with a patient, home health or hospice, especially hospice, that's death care, then how intimately can you be involved with that patient? How much empathy can you have for that patient if you're sitting there typing on a computer? And so a simple thing by asking a lot of the the nurses kind of what they think the best solution was. We came back with, okay, let's get iPads, let's put them on low light, and those iPads you can use while talking and looking directly at a person and having that empathy, having that personal connection. Still, you're not losing it like you would with a more perception, a more, a MacBook or something like that. And so little things like that we're able to tweak and do a better job of.
And Edward, when you first introduce this entire system into an acquisition, is it generally met with how much enthusiasm?
I think it depends. I think we've done it the right way and the wrong way. I think the right way to do it is go try to solve some problems and solve them with that methodology. And then people see that the problems are solved and okay, let's go just do the next one. I think in certain cases, if you overthink it, talk too much about it, you can scare people. People are, by the way, that the word lean has a bad connotation, so that's not a great word to use all over the place. But it really comes down to the relationship with the team and trust. And if you have a solid trust and relationship with the team and respect, then and there's certain problems that they have not been able to solve to date, then looking at new methodologies to solve those problems is something that most teams are open to. But a lot of it, Nick Laus knows this, we're in the relationship business. It comes down to trust and competency. And if they trust you and they respect your competency as an operator or business leader or advisor, then it generally goes well. If you don't have those two things, it doesn't go as well.
Let me take a couple of steps back in our conversation here, because you have a background from earlier in your career, you worked in commercial real estate. And so you have extensive experience on that side. And from that, you have a different view on the benefit of doing a dividend recap and the value of holding strong assets long term. Now, if we transition to discussing terms, independent sponsor terms, the three main pillars, as we all know, are the closing fee, the management fee, and the carry. And they're all within a certain range, to some extent converging as the industry is becoming more mature. But if we were to borrow from the real estate world, what are some other fees or other ways of doing sponsored deals that could exist or that you maybe already have seen in the space?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people have moved to models that are a little more real estate, or more in some cases more like restaurant deals, where there is you have a preferred return that is 18%, right? And so what that does is it has a very high liquidation preference. And then you have a warrant for 10 to 20% of the business at the end, right? And let's just say out of that 18, 10% is current pay, right? And that's kind of a structured equity piece. And so as it's a different investor, maybe a different investor, but that investor says, okay, I'm getting paid 10%. If the business is doing well, I can get paid as high as 18 once they start paying it current. The firm is looking and saying, oh, like if I can get to pay this at 18%, which is good for the investor, I can pay this down, quickly, and then the investor will own 10 or 20% of the company, and I'll own 80 and can keep the company and run with it. So we've seen a lot that model used more and more in what I would call the searcher space. But that model is starting to be used more and more. That model only works on a company when you're buying it at a lower multiple valuation, right? Like a 3 to 4 or something like that.
And so what you're saying here is that you bring in a one-stop shop, that instead of having a bank lender and equity investors, you're saying, let's bring in one shop who can do the whole capital structure. And they're sitting top of the capital table. So there's, they have good risk measurement, or risk reward profile is pretty good for them. And they're charging 80% plus potentially have some equity warrants on top of that. And it still works for you as a sponsor because you're only paying 10% here and now. And then the remaining 8 out of the 18 are compounding. Going back to my question on real estate, what else do they do? One thing, for instance, as we've done add-on acquisitions in my deals, I spent a lot of time on add-on acquisitions, and sure, they grow the company, and so hence can benefit my carry and management fee. But it's kind of a disproportionate amount of work compared to chasing your next deal. And so have you ever seen, for instance, an add-on fee? I never got it, unfortunately, but is that something that exists?
Yes. So we don't believe in it. We would never charge it. And that doesn't mean that's not, it's not wrong or anything. And I know I have plenty of friends that have an add-on fee. We just think that, we have a management fee, and we work in the business and we're paid to help with everything, right? We also think it's so accretive to the equity for everybody that it's worth doing. But that being said, there are plenty of businesses and plenty of sponsors that go get partners that do the following. They will over-equitize the business or just buy it all with equity, like complete equity. And then they will go do a buy and build, and they will lever that up over time and pay the independent sponsor, holding company, family office, whoever it may be, pay them a fee for each deal that they do. So that I do see that as being commonplace, and some of the larger private equity firms are happy to pay those and do that. We think we've had bad experiences with it. We've seen bad experiences with it. What I think it does or can do is it can motivate a management team or a sponsor to want to do add-on acquisitions for the sake of a fee. And so we always believe you can either build it or you can buy it. But when in doubt, build it. And so if you're growing organically, but let's say you have a cap on a management fee and you're growing organically, but you can go get a deal done and get paid, then it can create a incentive to go get a deal done when the company may not need it or it may hurt the company. And we've actually seen management teams and owners actually kind of really hurt businesses through that type of incentive, an incentive not necessarily to just grow EBITDA, but to do it through inorganic deals.
Yeah, that makes me feel better about not having one. Thank you.
What about just grow it. Sell more.
What about the exit fees? Is that something that you think could exist in this space?
Yes, I have seen a lot of independent sponsors have started to move towards an exit fee with their LPs. And I actually think, I think that is actually happening more for the right reason. So that what that does, let's say there's an independent sponsor that has 3 companies or 2 companies, let's say, and one of them is growing really, really large, right? And it's paying them a massive, a good management fee. Well, selling that means they have to go replace that income, right? And so selling that means, so there's kind of a disincentive to sell it. And, they want to get, that's when you really get paid. So most independent sponsors and firms want to sell, but it also, changes their overhead. So if you have a sales fee when you sell, what that can do is give a year of runway with the same management fee that you had before to run your firm while you look for another deal to replace that management fee. So that's actually a very logical step. And we've seen a lot of sponsors start to move towards that. And people are very open to that from what we've seen.
But if I was an investor, wouldn't I say, hey, you got enough, you got a great carry here, and I paid you a handsome management fee all along while we owned it. Why should I pay you to bridge you to your next deal after the fact?
It's a very valid point. What we've seen, the ones we've seen in that model have really strong investors who are there for the long term. And I think what the investor says is, hey, if they're stretched and they're struggling, then they're looking for their next deal with a bit of desperation versus with kind of a methodical, make sure you get the right one done. And that's always that's the deal business.
So it's the investors wanting to set their sponsor up for success for the next deal.
If the investors care about the sponsor over the deal, then it makes more sense. If they just care about their deal and getting paid on their deal, it's not really, that's not the right alignment to Nick's. Nick, I would agree with you.
And is that approximately how big it would be? 1 year worth of management fee?
That's what we've seen. So it would be the equivalent of 1 year worth of management fee, so that the sponsor then has it. They sell, they sit down, they say, okay, we've got a year to look for, our next one and kind of replace that, and not have to fire people on the team or that kind of thing. Now, they should be getting paid enough with the win to do some of that, to Nicholas's point as well.
But it's too late to get an exit fee if you've already closed your deal, right?
Yes, we've never seen anybody get an exit fee after the deal is closed. So Nick, good luck with that.
Great, Edward. We just got a little bit of time left, so let's make sure we get to some of the marketing and how you build and nurture your network, because you're very systematic about it at Coltala. It pays dividends almost every time you do kind of a mailing. So where to start? The Coltala report?
Sure. So our Coltala report, we've got kind of 2 ways of doing our kind of our business development and branding. So we have the branding engine, which is our Coltala report in our LinkedIn. And then we have our relationship engine, which is what we call our top 50 relationships. So the 80-20 rule exists where we get about 80% from the relationships, but the other stuff does help and increases brand awareness. So I'll start with the marketing side. We have about 30-something thousand newsletter subscribers to our Coltala report. And we've worked really hard to make a systemized report that basically, focuses on similar things each time we send it out. And sometimes we'll talk about Texas, we'll talk about our team, we'll highlight team members, we'll talk about what we're looking for, we'll talk about deals that we've done. We always have an educational piece that we think is valuable to sellers because a lot of our newsletter subscribers are business owners that would potentially sell. Our LinkedIn is very similar. We take a lot of the content that we put into the Coltala report and we will kind of drip it out into LinkedIn over time. Because we don't capture it all on email, capture it all on LinkedIn. I will say the email, when we send it out, we have sometimes seen 14, 15 deals within 24 hours from that.
And you send that out once a month, you said?
We do. We don't want to bother people. We find that once a month, people can delete it or ignore it pretty easily. If you start doing more than that, then they look for that unsubscribe button way down at the bottom and try to get out of it. So we try to do enough to be top of mind, but not enough to annoy people. And then on the top 50, we actually, our idea is to meet with people that are showing us opportunities. At Coltala, all of our businesses that we've bought so far have been off market. We've never done a brokered deal from a investment bank. And so we meet with, it's a combination, business owners, law firms, community leaders, political leaders. And so we try to hang out with people that are showing us opportunities, but that we like. And so over time, we kind of have a relationship score where we're doing more and more business with different folks. And we kind of keep track of that and try to meet with them quarterly or at least twice a year. And then what it does is we were able to go really deep with some people, build meaningful relationships over now 7 years in existence at Coltala or longer with Ralph and my relationships from before. And those relationships end up sending us a deal that we would have never seen. The deal is very warm. We get a big recommendation. That intro person oftentimes will be part of the deal, help nurture the deal. And because we're so relationship driven, that has been very helpful for us. Pond Robinson is a great example of that. Russell Hartsfield, who works with us, we spend a lot of time with Russell, ran Texas Capital Bank. He had a friend from church looking to sell his business, was going to go do a broader auction, was like, hey, I know somebody, you might not have to do that, put yourself through that. We came together and now we own Pond Robinson and it's going well. So it's a great example of spending time with those folks has really paid a lot of dividends for us.
And Edward, when you say spending time, do you mean lunch? Do you mean dinner? Does it depend? And I'm just trying to get a sense of how systematic is this? Is this, you said you kind of keep track of it. Do you have a CRM where every week it's like, these are the four people we want to meet with in a month from now. Let's go to the typical, our usual spot sort of thing.
We are very systematic about it. In what we try to do is this is not like a shoot them an email or have a quick conversation. It's a set up a time and it's either a Zoom or it's an in-person meeting. But it's a relationship building interaction, right? And 80% of those conversations are about kids and sports and what you're doing this weekend and how's your sick mom and that sort of thing. We really like, we want to get paid to hang out with our best friends, and most of the people we do business with are the same. And so over time, we end up gravitating to people we have a natural affinity to. We have fun talking about life with them. They're seen as much more than partners, right? They're friends. And then we get business from them. So there's a dual purpose. One is systematically helps us see more deals and higher quality deals. The deeper we go with relationships, the better deals we see from them. But then on the other side, it's a better quality of life to hang out with people you like.
And you said 80% of your deals have come from those 50, that 50 top 50 relationships system.
Yes.
What CRM do you use?
We use Pipedrive. We are, I don't want to say we're cheap. We are thrifty. We look at every Monday, we look at our P&L and we say, hey, does that water machine, do we really need that? I mean, we test everything, right? Our copier, there's a lease. Do we need a copier? Can we text this stuff? Can we do a PDF? And so we're always looking at how we can improve. So every year we look at our CRM, we look at our marketing, we look at, so we use Pipedrive, which we think is very, you can move, shoot, and communicate really well. It's very intuitive. It's kind of like, I'm a Mac guy. It's very intuitive like Apple. Salesforce is clunky. Navitar, it's kind of tough. We look at Deal Cloud. It's just offers a lot, but you're not going to use 80%. At least we are not going to use 80% of that stuff. And so we found, a Salesforce is like, I don't know, $1,300 a month. And I think Pipedrive might be $300, right?
Okay, yeah.
I mean, it's much cheaper. And so our forum with our group of other private equity guys in Dallas has really worked. I mean, we'll spend a session all on what tech are you using? Like, should you use HubSpot or should you use MailChimp? And we will go deep on that, right? How do you want to do your reporting? Do you want to do your own reporting, or are you going to use an outsourced person that's going to, that you're going to send all your stuff to and is going to hold it on their cloud? So we're always interrogating, can we use better tech, and can we do it cheaper?
And do you use Pipedrive not only for outbound with deal sources, but also with business owners?
We do, yeah. So we actually have our top 50 is in Pipedrive. And so you can rank our entire top 50 by what we call a relationship score. The relationship score is how many deals have been sent to us. And we can see over a 7-year period, one guy's got 12. I won't mention his name, but I love hanging out with him. He's like one of my best friends. Anyway, so it's like, when are we getting together again?
I want friends like that.
Yeah, he's a great friend. Yeah, and I've tried to help him a lot too. So we see that, and what's nice is you can just kind of press the button and say, okay, 80 days have passed and I haven't met with these 7, and I need to check in and see how they're doing and that sort of stuff. So it's fun.
Edward,
everything's a process with us. Yeah,
we've gotten a little bit away from it, but I need to get an answer to this question. On the content piece, the Coltala report. So the secret to building a powerful content engine is putting out good content, but also building the audience. A list of 30,000 for business owner / private equity shop. That's a big audience. Was there any secret to building that, or has it just been email address by email address over 7 years?
Yeah. So I'll answer that question in 2 parts. One is LinkedIn has been largely the same, right? We're one of the highest LinkedIn followed groups in the state of Texas, even up with some massive private equity firms. And when we stack rank ourselves against them, and we have little benchmarks and that sort of thing. But listen, we there's a mix of acquisition, and so we meet a lot of people along the way. We go to a lot of conferences, so we do get these lists. We have a lot of people reach out to us, and we try to keep those. And so we're just very methodical about that, about keeping those emails, right? And then we'll replace them. There's certain people that just, we are more geographic focused, for example, in the state of Texas. And so over time, somebody, a business owner in LA is not going to be interested once they see a thing that we're strong in Texas and the contiguous states. So we do lose people, and we have to work to replace them. It's not easy at all. And I think, and anybody that has a newsletter subscriber list, they better have really good content. And even with good content, they're going to need some, what I would call inorganic growth too, finding lists, getting lists of business owners and reaching out to them, try to get them on the list too.
Great. So there has been inorganic addition to that list. Yes,
there has been some inorganic to that for sure.
Okay.
LinkedIn, great. No, LinkedIn has just been straight up. I mean, I think we're at 8,000 followers or something like that. And that's really about keeping content going, which is sometimes hard, but we have a good system to do it.
And so you said you get up to 14, 15 deals per email blast. And that's insane.
Yeah, it is. But we also get them from, we've had direct business owners that we've had under LOI reach out to us directly on LinkedIn and say, hey, I've noticed what you do. You don't seem like regular private equity. I love the mission margin thing. I'd like to talk to you. And so we're kind of anti-private equity in a way. A lot of people that reach out to us are like, we hate private equity. We want to talk to you. And that's really fulfilling for us, because the mission margin thing is like, I'm not on this earth to just make a lot of money. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and like, we really do care about impact. Like, it's authentic. And we also think that the business owner is the hero. We are, hopefully Yoda in providing the right guidance, the right plan, but they are definitely Luke Skywalker. And so there's a level of deference, and you are the hero that I think a lot of business owners find refreshing relative to I did 300 deals, and look, I went to a fancy school, and look how important I am, and look at my suit and my fancy car. And so that's been helpful to us to get a lot of these business owners that want to work with somebody who just says, "Hey, we're here to support you. You're the hero. How can we help you?"
Edward, let me press on that, because while I take you at your word, I could imagine a seller being skeptical, because a lot of private equity folks will say, "We care about you. We care about your business. We care about the people." They'll talk the talk, but not necessarily walk the walk. How do you convince a skeptical seller that you're not all talk when it comes to caring about people?
So the easiest way to convince somebody that you're going to do something in the future is to show them that you've done it in the past. And so what we do is we say, don't trust us, trust the people we work with. We say, hey, talk to David Jackson, talk to Mike Raybon, talk to the leaders who have worked with us, who have sold with us, who have worked with us. Are we jerks? How do we show up in tough moments? And we'll say, ask them about the time where this happened. Asked about the time where we had to have the tough conversation. How did we handle ourselves and what went down? And we're foxhole guys. So we will have tough conversations and we will disagree. But at the end of the day, we want the team to win. So that's how we do it. We give them references of people that have worked with us for many, many years. It's actually one of the first things we do, and we volunteer it. We say, hey, if you're going to work with us, here's a couple references. And by the way, can you give us 3-2 on you? I'm an Intel guy. I can't help it. I gotta contact people and just make sure. You never know.
I think this has been extremely substantive. Thank you, Edward. What a pleasure.
No, thank you. And congrats, Niklas, on all of your success. I've learned a lot from you, and hopefully you learned some from us by being in this group together. And we'll really appreciate what you're doing for the community as well, because I think there are a lot of independent sponsors out there that can be great business owners and really help society. And small and medium-sized businesses pay 95% of the taxes in this country. There should be more focus on helping them, financing them, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm glad there's a focus on that small and medium-sized business kind of side of the world. And thanks for doing what you do.
So, Edward, if people want to get the Coltala report, I assume there's a sign-up box right on your homepage?
There's a sign up. You will see it hopefully within about 7 seconds of clicking onto our page that you should sign up for it.
Okay.
Because I was behind trying to get that up on the page. So yeah, you just go to our page and it'll allow you to sign up and you'll get our content. And if you want our content to be better or have suggestions, send us emails at info@coltala.com and we will work to make it better. We're always improving.
Great. Well, we will, of course, link to that in the show notes, and people can also find you, Edward Crawford, on LinkedIn. Thank you very much, sir, for coming on and sharing a little bit about Coltala. Excellent.
Thanks, gentlemen. Great to spend time with you.
Hope you enjoyed that interview. For more like it, subscribe to Meeting Other Minds wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also watch us on YouTube. And check out Minds Capital, where Nicholas and I are partners alongside Max Lummis. Minds Capital invests equity in independent sponsored deals. So if you're a sponsor with a deal under LOI, please visit mindscapital.co to start a conversation. There's also an investor tab on our website with information about partnership opportunities and future fundraises. See you in the next episode.